All right, welcome to everyone. I'm Elliott Antman, and as the screen says here, I'm the Director of the Skills Development Center for the Boston Biomedical Innovation Center. I'm a Professor of Medicine at the Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Med School and Associate Dean for Clinical Translational Research. And tonight's session is entitled The Commercialization Apprenticeship. And I'd like to welcome both our faculty and our trainees and all of whom are innovators to this session. Let me just briefly tell you that the Boston Biomedical Innovation Center is one of 3 centers around the country which is designed to promote translational research and actually facilitate innovative technologies and drive them to exit to commercialization. Formally, we're a consortium of multiple academic institutions, government representatives, the National Center for Accelerating Innovation at the NIH, nonprofits, various industry and venture capital groups will be collaborating with us, all designed to, as I indicated, promote innovation and help drive technologies that will be useful for dealing with our patients to exit to commercialization. The first of the institutes at the NIH that stepped up to help with the funding for this kind of program was the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. So the projects that at the moment we're particularly interested in funding are in heart, lung, blood, and sleep domains. The Boston Biomedical Innovation Center does have a large number of grants that we have received applications for, and I want to tell you about 2 of those that are available on a rolling basis. They are our pilot grant program, which is $50,000 a year plus indirect costs. It comes to about $58,000 for that 1 year to get your pilot data. And drive grants, which are a total of about $200,000, which we anticipate would be used over 18 months. And that amounts with indirect costs to about $350,000. There are several large sections within B-BIC, and one of which is the Skills Development Center, and we'll be talking more about that this evening. But our purpose here is to introduce you to B-BIC more generally first, and I want to tell you about some of the individuals who are here tonight. So maybe you can just raise your hands. Roger Kidman is our Executive Director. Leslie Watts, who is our Administrative Director. There's Erin McKenna, who is our Senior Project Manager. Where's Cheryl Vaughn, who's our Skills Development Center Managing Director. And there's David Opp, who is our Coordinator for the Skills Development Center. Now, the way we're going to organize things this evening is to have an overview set of comments in a moment from Dr. Burt Adelman. I'll tell you a bit about Burt in just a moment. And then we're going to have a panel discussion from individuals who have been doing this kind of work. And we're going to explore with them how they got to where they are. And it'll be your opportunity to ask questions of them. There's some material that is on the tables as you came in, a postcard that tells you more about B-BIC and gives you the URL for the website and tells you a little bit more detail about the pilot grants and the drive grants on the back. A lot of the educational resources that are in the Skills Development Center will be based upon the Harvard Catalyst Education Program. There's a card about that. And we're developing some novel educational resources customized to help individuals learn about how to develop the pitch for commercializing their product and to actually present it in a way to venture capital and potential buyers, if you like, from industry and help really promote those technologies. Now, there's an individual here, Burt Adelman, who's actually an academician. He's a hematologist and is on the faculty at Harvard Medical School, but has also been very innovative himself in his own career and has worked with a number of companies. I first met Burt when it was Iogen that he was working with, and he's now the Didex, right? Is that the name? Diax. Burt is the Executive Vice President for Research and Development and the Chief Medical Officer for DIAX, which is located in Burlington, Mass. And Burt is very inspired about translating his excitement and his vision for what has been so important in his own career to individuals who are interested in this kind of a path. So, Burt, I'm going to ask you to come on up here and take us through that, and then we'll head over to our panel discussion.
Well, thank you, Elliott. Maybe just to help, I'll say a few more quick words about myself and do I need this whole panel to run these slides? Just the arrows. Okay. I am a hematologist, and I did train at the Brigham and remain affiliated with the Heme Division at the Brigham. In 1991, I joined what was then Biogen, and I was there from 91 until 2007. I was the head of R&D, and I retired from there. So I was involved in the development of Hurulog, Amaviv, Avonex, Tysabri, some of the early work with the oral pill for MS that Biogen now sells, some of the early work with the extended half-life factor 9, factor 8 programs. Then I retired from Biogen, got involved with folks at Third Rock Ventures, started a dry eye company called 11 Biotherapeutics, which is now a public company in Cambridge, developing biologics for dry eye. And then moved over to DIAX about 2 years ago. DIAX is a small biotech company focused on orphan indications, in particular medications to treat hereditary angioedema. We're interested in the bradykinin pathway and some related pathobiology. So I've been in big pharma or big biotech from its beginning. I've been in little startup biotech, and now I'm in resurrection mode, where we're trying to raise from an inglorious past an old biotech company and doing pretty well. And I'm happy to be here. I'm very excited to be part of B-BIC, which I think gives all of you a great opportunity to get your ideas moving toward the clinic and toward the possibility of partnerships with pharmaceutical industry. I've got a brief presentation, if I figure out how to use the slides, that is abstracted from a presentation I made at the American Society of Hematology last December, where we had a whole set of lectures focused on how to get hematologists thinking about working with industry, how to bring their ideas to industry. So I've taken a few slides out of that. Please feel free, if you got a question while I'm going through these, I'm happy to address them. But I think, the best place to always start when you talk about research and development is where's the money and how much money is there. This graph shows you historic and projected total worldwide pharma R&D spending in billions of dollars. And you can see there are a couple of interesting observations from this graph. First of all, they spend a lot of money in R&D. So 2014, it's projected that I'm part of them, we will spend almost $140 billion on R&D. That's even more money than the Brigham and the General get from the NIH. Another, I think, interesting aspect of the slide, which is to some degree accentuated here with the compound aggregate growth rate of spending, is you can see that from 2002 to about 2008, this curve, these bars were pretty steadily and significantly increasing, and that since around 2009, there was actually a decline from 2008 to 2009, and since then, the rate of growth has declined. It's not to say that every year these are not sizable amounts spent, but the rate of growth has declined. However, I'm sure, Rich, if this was the NIH graph, it wouldn't look this promising, right? It would look flat to declining. So, observation number one is that pharma is still spending a lot of money on R&D, and there's no reason why all of you and your colleagues shouldn't be accessing those dollars. because pharma has not done that well despite all this money spent. Productivity in pharma is certainly at best flat, if not declining. And I think this is one of my favorite graphs. I've taken this from an annual report that Steve Burrell publishes. I don't know if he'll be doing it anymore because he's probably going to go to jail. But besides that, Burrell runs a bank. He was a very well-known biotech VC who apparently has, in the last couple of years, got a little too big for his finances. But these data are, I think, very interesting because starting from the bottom, working our way up, the bottom is essentially a graph of new product introductions. So you can take that as a surrogate for product approvals at the FDA. And although since 2011 we have had one or two up years, the average approval rate has been pretty stable over a good number of years. Development timelines, despite PDUFA, despite everyone's efforts to come up with faster ways to get drugs approved, development timelines have certainly not dramatically shortened, and this graph suggests that they've been slowly increasing. We've already talked about the fact that more and more money has been spent in R&D, and I think the most interesting component of this graph is that the only curve that's reliably rising on this graph is the sales curve. And if the cost of development has gone up, if development times are somewhat longer, and if, as we all know, this is a product-based industry, and if the number of new products is not increasing, then there has to be only one reason for why that yellow graph line goes up, right? Pretty obvious. The reason is prices go up, right? So the farm industry, unlike anybody else, has been unbelievably able to raise prices at a rate that has no relation to inflation or any other, reasonable measure of cost. And as we all know, the dirty little secret is you take when Lipitor was a $18 billion product, it maybe cost a penny to make the pill, and you sell it for an enormous amount of money. So the margins in the farm industry are unbelievable. However, this happy relationship is not going to continue. So we spend $3 trillion on healthcare in America, give or take a few hundred billion. And we are not going to spend $4 trillion or $5 trillion. So pharma is facing a huge problem in that productivity is certainly not growing, and it's a product-based industry. And we all know what is actually happening in the immediate time frame to deal with this problem is we're seeing a step up again in mergers and acquisitions. You look at, for example, what's happened recently in town here. Shire Pharmaceuticals bought Veropharm, which was my #1 competitor. Shire has a product in HAE, Veropharm has a product in HAE, so Shire paid $4.5 billion to acquire that product. And then 6 months later, after dancing around, Shire was acquired by AbbVie. AbbVie also trying to make sure that they had some way to fill in the pipeline behind Humira, which is the #1 selling drug in the world, that will be subject to biosimilar replacement sometime in the not too distant future. So productivity in the industry is a problem. Looked at from another perspective, the challenges that the industry faces by therapeutic area, just to show you what the failure rate is across indications. So 30% of product failures occur in oncology, 29% or 14% in CNS, and you can read the rest. The point being that many high unmet need areas are also the areas with the greatest challenge for success. Most products fail because they actually don't work. And they don't work usually because the target proves not to actually be pathobiologically related to the underlying disease that we're trying to treat. Oncology, again, being sort of the league leader for places where we have a target, we make a drug, and then it doesn't work. However, there are other reasons. The number 2 reason why products fail is because they may work, but they're not safe. So the industry still faces tremendous challenges. Perhaps the fundamental challenge is coming up with the right targets to make their drugs against. And I often say that, and when I was at Biogen, this was certainly true. In our basement, we probably had 100,000 mice. And not a single one of those mice looked anything like the patients that I would see when I come over to the Brigham. And I think one of the real problems that the pharma industry faces is that their favorite experimental model is not clearly relevant to the diseases in their favorite consumers. So mice are only somewhat valuable in identifying targets. The advantage that you have here is that you have access to ultimately the fundamental experimental model, which is humans with disease. Pharma, they don't run hospitals, they don't run clinics. Whatever access they have to human subjects, to pathologic specimens, to working with patients who have diseases they wish to sell drugs to, whatever access they have has to come through these institutions and ultimately through you all, because you're the ones who see the patients every day. So that's a huge advantage that I often believe that hospitals haven't figured out how really to bridge. I know Mason's working on this. Part of the problem is simply cultural differences. Drug companies think one way, hospitals and academic institutions think another way, and we've too long let those differences keep us from effectively collaborating with each other, even though, it's a hop, skip, and a jump down the block here to Merck. But I bet a lot of people don't even know they're there, or if they know they're there, they think it's a good place to go for a meeting occasionally, not necessarily where you would logically go to find collaborators or support for your research. However, when it comes to biologics, pharma is going biotech. So as we just said, the number 1 selling drug in the world today is Humira, which is a fully human monoclonal antibody to TNF. It used to be Lipitor, which would have been a small molecule, but no longer. Biotech products account for $163 billion in product sales. And as I note here, 429 biotech products are currently in big pharma pipelines. Almost 60% of them are monoclonal antibodies. I think the important message to you all, monoclonal antibodies are certainly one of the favorite ways academic investigators look for, identify, and manipulate targets. So many of you may already be working with reagents, created reagents in your lab that may very well be easily translated into the next Humira or other important product. So you're already on your way to the potential for productive collaborations. Academic research is not excluded from pharma products, and in fact, up to 24% of new products approved between 1998 and 2007 found their origin in academic collaborations with industry. I think that could be a much higher number, particularly if there's more focus and attention placed on those collaborations. But it still says that, that you are already an important source of novel ideas, and that when you bang on industry door, they should be happy to let you in and talk to you. From that same article, an important point is that many of the most high value or products meeting most critical needs are actually in that subset of targets and products that came out of academic labs. And as industry more and more is held accountable for defining and defending the value proposition of their products, which doesn't mean the risk-benefit profile as much as it means to third-party payers, are we getting something worth the price? As they increasingly, can't pull the next Nexium out of their bag, they actually have to have something meaningful. They need to be able to access the unique insights that come out of academic labs, which are much more commonly focused on solving important novel problems than they are on life cycle management. So in my last slide is to point out that there are differences in how we think in industry and how folks think and act in the academic world. Neither are right, neither are wrong. We have to acknowledge that they're different and figure out how yet to get together to effectively collaborate. And I think with that, yeah, oh, I have one more slide. Thank you. Right. Cheryl helped me with my slides. So how do we find each other? How do you come to me and tell me you have a good idea that I ought to be interested in? And what do you need, by the way, to show me to really get me interested? Or how do you get to Roger, who runs the Partners Innovation Fund, which I'm honored to be on the advisory committee for? And how do you convince him that you've got something in the lab that we ought to put some of our money to? I think the simple answer is you got to get out there and talk to people all the time. Publishing is not good enough, in part because there's just too much literature. And nobody can read all the literature and figure out, oh, I want to go to that lab because they wrote this paper, and talk to them about what they're doing. You've got to publish, you got to speak at meetings, and you have to talk to people. If you see somebody at a presentation of yours at a meeting and they've got a name tag and it says Dyax or Biogen or Merck, he or she is not the first person you should be walking away from. He or she is probably the first person that you should be walking up to if you actually want to start meeting people and talking about the possibility for collaboration. And fortunately here, at Harvard, we do have venture funds, and we do have a lot of in-house expertise to help you, move these ideas along. And those expertise are not always in the offices that may help you get a patent. That's not necessarily where the right connections to industry are. Patents are important, but the patent office is not necessarily your best friend for getting access to the $140 billion that we're spending in R&D. So, thank you very much. Look forward to our discussion.
So the individuals here on the panel, including Burt, are here to engage in discussion, and you can do this in the traditional way of raising your hand. You can do it by writing out a question and putting it on an index card. And let me see, we're extremely high tech here at Harvard now. You can tweet your question, you can email your question, and of course there's the snail mail method there. Do you know what tweeting is actually, Burt?
No.
You've done that, so, check with Rich, he'll help you with that. Okay, so just to get the conversation going, I thought I would ask the group to consider if there was one thing you wish you had known when you entered the field that you're in now, with thinking about bringing products forward that will help patients, and really dealing with the whole issue of collaboration between academia and industry, what would be that fact that you wish you'd known? Let's start with Mason. Tell me what you think. If you were sitting in the audience and you were in that state, what's the one thing you wish you had known, knowing what you know now?
When I started working in basic science laboratory, we cloned a couple of molecules that at the time we thought were going to be important commercial products. Now, the molecules themselves were going to be products, but you could use those molecules for products. I didn't know anything about how you made a drug or how you got to a commercial product. And we licensed these things out to companies who, in the end, didn't either. And they ended up not being commercial products. And so I think one of the things I learned is that if you really believe in the science that you're doing and you think it has value for human health, it's actually often incredibly important for you to stay connected to the commercial development process, because you maybe more than anyone are going to be the force behind getting it to the clinic. And we've set up so many barriers in academia to keep you from doing that. It's actually a real challenge. But one of the most interesting things, and I think you saw it this week when the University of California decided to put $250 million into a venture fund, specifically to invest in the discoveries of the faculty of that university to make commercial products. I think the world has changed now. And I think one of the things we're seeing at Harvard and others is that the fear of the NIH budget collapse and the ability to support our research has finally made the universities recognize that these commercial interactions are not only terribly important for making products that help people, but they're actually terribly important for the financial future of our institutions. And there are lots of conflicts, there's a lot we could talk about there, but we need to do this.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad we are recording this event, because you've captured it so well for perpetuity there. Mark, tell us what's the one thing that you wish somebody had told you as you were starting out.
I would actually agree a lot with what was just said about you need to be the spokesperson, you need to believe in your project, you need to do that. I think the other thing you start to realize is that you don't know everything you need to know to make this be successful. And so finding the right person, creating that team, being flexible, being open, asking questions, those are all things that I found that were really, really important to try to move that technology forward. So for me, just realizing that I'm not that important in the big picture, everybody else is really important in the big picture, and trying to work with them is something that I certainly learned along the pathway.
Rich?
Yeah, so my answer would be similar. I think that as an academic, you tend to drive a lot of things yourself, and your lab focuses on you, and your grants focus on you. But once you start commercializing things, you need so much teamwork, and you need to really have an idea what the patent agent does, but you also have to know that the patent agent knows much more about patents than you ever will. And so there's so much more teamwork and understanding what other people are doing that goes to success. And I think a lot of times the inventor drops out of the picture because you're not useful anymore. And that's actually part of the process sometimes. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you can continue to network and you can continue to be supportive, but a lot of times if things are going to have value, they're going to go on past you very quickly.
That's an important perspective, and Mason, you've been involved in things. So let's talk about lovastatin. You know, it went on, went forward, and you were instrumental in getting it to us. But
well, be careful. I played a very, very small role.
I'm giving you more credit.
Yeah, you're giving me way more credit than I would ever deserve for that. But that particular field, the creation of the statins, the world often thinks that Brown and Goldstein played a huge role in the creation of statins because they cloned the LDL receptor, and they worked out all the beautiful biochemistry of cholesterol homeostasis. And they did have an important role because some of the things they did were actually used in the early assay development for the drugs that were developed. But it was Endo in Japan that actually made the first HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor. And it was that work on fungal metabolites that showed it could actually affect cholesterol metabolism that led to the discovery. But there was a receptive community at Merck that were physician scientists who understood the Brown and Goldstein work, who understood what the cholesterol problem was doing to patients for cardiovascular disease. And it was that community that actually said we need to make drugs. And then they reached out to people like me who had patients in clinics and said, can you help us? And we did. And to me, it was the drug class that really put prevention in the forefront of cardiology for coronary disease. and terribly exciting to be involved in it, even when I had nothing to do with the original discovery of the pathway or the cholesterol metabolism. It was just exciting to take somebody with familial hypercholesterolemia and a cholesterol of 600 and make it 250, and you see that they no longer have heart disease. Now we make their LDL cholesterol 60, and still debate whether that's low enough, but it was just enormously exciting to be involved in that process and to see how many people had to be collaborating in order to make that a success.
So, Burt, you're really a shining example of someone who's been very successful in navigating this path and holding an academic connection, an academic appointment, but being so very successful in the industry environment. Can you tell us, as you entered industry, what were your first impressions and how did they evolve over time? You've been doing this for quite a while now.
So I would echo the comments that have already been made. You know, unlike when you run your own academic lab and you think you can do everything, you can't get it all done by yourself. It's a big project. It takes a lot of people with a lot of unique specialization. So you really have to figure out how to be part of a team and trust your colleagues. The other thing is that details matter. So drug development is you know, I often say it's not rocket science, it's harder. And one of the reasons why it's harder is because it's all the details matter. And if you know, an important, I think, point around that for academic people is that when you're trying to transfer technology to a pharma company, they got to believe you. And they're cynical about it for a reason, because they've tried many times to transfer technology and been unsuccessful because they couldn't reproduce results. And I think it's because, you know, the degree to which details matter in the academic world versus the degree to which they matter in the pharma world is almost night and day. So I had to learn that details matter. You can't overlook a finding just because it doesn't make sense to you. You know it can't be right because it's biology, and we don't know all of the outcomes, and you have to follow every observation that doesn't make sense until you can convince yourself that either it's not relevant or that it means something, and I have to know what it means.
So, Mark, you've been involved in co-founding 4 companies, and it's quite complex, this whole idea of commercialization of technology. What's your perspective on why that landscape is so complex, and how did you navigate that landscape?
Navigate's a good word, I guess. You learn as you do it, right? Some days are good, some days are bad. It's always challenging. I think for me, what I found is that if I can get the right group of people around the table, things are much easier. And so identifying the right team, the right people you can work with makes a huge difference. When you don't have the right people, it's challenging, and it really is difficult. And so I think anything you can do like that to help guide you through the process. And literally, it's a lot about asking questions, talking with people who have done this before and asking them, how did you manage this? You know, what did you do about the patent? How did you find the right person? How did you find a CEO? You know, asking those questions is critical. And so for me, when I started off, it was exactly that. I met a gentleman at a conference for the first company, basically dated him for about 6 to 7 months, essentially. Got to know him, got to understand how he thinks about the problems. We found that we had a joint interest, and we started. And he brought marketing expertise, which I knew nothing about, and that was a really nice compliment. So ask a lot of questions, try to meet as many people as possible, and be open to criticism, just as much as someone telling you you're doing a great job. That's really critical.
So you just touched on something there with a colleague bringing that marketing expertise there, something you knew nothing about. So this is a launch where we're informing everybody about our Skills Development Center in B-BIC. So I have to ask the group, what kind of training do you wish had been available when you were starting out And we're going to try and make sure that we have that in the Skills Development Center. So Rich, you went through the cardiology program at the Brigham, but it had nothing to do with, for this
Yeah, no,
commercialization
it's actually
concept.
sort of the opposite of cardiology because you have to do ego suppression.
Ah,
That's
yes.
kind of the main skill, and cardiologists tend to not be so good at that. Surgeons are worse.
Remember, we're recording this. Rich.
But I think it is, if you come in as the academic person into forming a startup, one of the big things is making sure that everyone has their interests aligned. I mean, if you have someone whose interests are not aligned, it's just not going to work. And so you have to understand those people. And to do that, I think you have to not be the inventor, but be of service to the broader goal and where things have to go. And so I learned that, the first one I formed, I didn't make much money, but it was also, I was sort of like, okay, I invented this, you guys go off and make me money. And as I've gone on, I've learned more about sort of trusting other people and making the whole process go. And frankly, I've earned more money as that's gone on too. So I think you learn to put your ego at the door and to let people do their job and to really try to understand what they're doing.
So Burt, you've seen the academic environment here, and what's the advice you would have for individuals who are starting out? What should they seek out in their training, and what's your advice to us about what kind of resources we ought to make sure we make available?
Well, I think if your intention is to be a translational scientist, that is, you're addressing a problem that is relevant to a human disease, I think that it's good to be able to envision where you're starting and where you want to go. You don't have to be an expert pharmacologist, you don't have to be an expert in molecule development, but I think you need to understand all the steps that are necessary along the way, and you need to be able to tell a really good story. Because particularly if you're going to try to get money from Roger or someone out on Newberry Street that's running a venture fund, I've never met people with a shorter attention span. You show them 15 slides and they're already on their iPhone. So you got to understand what message you want to deliver, and you have to be able to deliver it in a relatively short and compelling manner. So you really have to know why you're there.
Do you practice your elevator speech in front of the mirror?
Fortunately, I'm on the receiving end these days, not on the giving end. But whenever people ask me for advice, the first thing I say is, if you've got more than 12 slides, you've got too much to say, or you don't know what the message is you want to deliver.
I would just really second that comment. One of the things that I do at the consulting time that I have available at Harvard Medical School is I actually work for one venture firm as a venture partner. It's not 5, yeah. We started 27 companies in the last 7 years, so I've seen 27 companies started from scratch. And I've also seen 500 companies not started from scratch. We actually review 400 business plans a year. Unfortunately, they have a set of associates that triage those, so otherwise, Roger, I would not be able to do that in 1 day a week. So I'm watching this as being videotaped. I have a more constricted time set. But the single biggest problem is what Burt just said, is that the academic investigator comes in because they're excited about their work. They have a belief that it has real value for a patient, and they are unable to articulate the need, the process to get to the delivery of whatever it is, and how one could visualize transforming that idea into a product in a sufficiently short period of time to get a set of people, mostly with business degrees, to have any idea what they're talking about. And those plans just go right in the trash can.
Okay, so let's actually bring in some of the other people into the conversation now, because Aaron, I'm going to ask you to describe, as a senior project manager, what you offer to individuals who have all these cool ideas and technologies that they think have merit. And then we're going to talk about what the Skills Development Center can do to help the things that Mason just talked about. Let's talk about the project management first.
Sure. I come at this with over 16 years of product development experience in the medical device space. And so what I've been doing and try to bring to each proposal that comes my way is, just to see what is known across a range of spaces. So not just the basic technology idea and vision of a product, although, to start there, but also then look at what the understanding is of the potential market, who those users are, thinking about how we would get it approved, what we would be going for, and start to then work to find the people out there in the realm that would be able to help the team construct more detailed strategies in each of these spaces and build and develop them over the course, if we are investing in the project, over the course of that project, in addition to developing a project plan with focused milestones targeted on answering and addressing the greatest technology questions outstanding that would be potentially causing investors to hesitate on wanting to see, understanding whether this could be a successful program. So, through B-BIC, we do have the support of a couple of folks down there on the panel, as well as some others that can give us that kind of external feedback on our proposals and projects, and we'll take that and use it to help structure our strategies.
And what we're trying to help with in the Skills Development Center, which works collaboratively with the project management that you've just heard, is to satisfy some of the deficiencies that many of our academicians might have with respect to dealing with the concepts of commercialization. And the resources that are available are in several classes. There are more general resources that will be explaining what patents are and the basic concepts, but there are our major goal is to build customized resources so that individuals with these specific projects can actually learn exactly what they need to make their project most appealing to those individuals that have been mentioned as the kinds of groups that you're going to need to talk to. And that is a major effort that Cheryl and David and I will be working on. Yes, fire away.
My name is Sam Patz, and I have a medical device that I've submitted for B-BIC. But based on what I've heard here, it strikes me that it would be enormously useful to have the opportunity to make the pitch in an audience and get critiqued by it. I don't know if that's part of the program.
Yes.
But it strikes me that, I've done the pitch and I've been told to cut the slides down, and also cut the excitement so much, get to the business, but I know that would be enormously useful.
You're right on, and it is one of the things that we're planning. And I wasn't joking when I said, do you practice your elevator speech in front of the mirror? Because I think those of us who grew up focusing on the science of the project and the academic environment give the 100-slide lecture and are not focusing on the elevator pitch or understanding it from a commercialization perspective. And that's actually something that we need to do. And that is a major effort for the customized kinds of resources that we're talking about in the Skills Development Center. Okay, any other comments from the audience here? Yeah, Fred.
So you all are sitting there because you've been successful at it and you're senior academics at the same time. What are the tensions between a conventional academic career for a young person and pursuing this kind of activity as a major focus of their career? And how do you balance those tensions between the need to publish and do other things that are important that academics do versus pursuing this dream, which, as Mason said, many fall by the wayside. This I think is a real problem for young investigators to decide whether they're right to get into this, whether they have the stomach for it from the beginning.
Well, I think it's an incredibly important issue, Fred, and one that people really do have to make often a decision about. Rich tell you more about what he's done out of his lab. You know, I laughed at when the slide said, you know, the apprenticeship. I began this process at an age where most venture capitalists are ready to retire. And so I think I never felt like, when I was apprenticing, I was very senior. And had I done it as a young person, I don't think I would have had the academic success, as however you define that, because it is an enormous pull away from the bench work that I have been trained to do. And so I think there are people who should be translational scientists who are actually not the conceivers of the technology or the creators of the idea, but are the implementers of the idea in the clinic. And their careers will be doing the translational work, and hopefully our institutions are going to find ways to support them and promote them, even when they haven't been Rich's discovery person at the bench. I think that's a career path we need to figure out how to foster. But the person who actually make the discovery and translate it themselves is an extraordinarily rare individual. It's typically a physician science if it's a clinical product, because how do you go from a bench lab to a patient without actually being somebody who can bridge both worlds, which is extremely hard. So I think we need to be careful about the message we're trying to create here. I think we're trying to talk to basic scientists and say, think about your ideas as commercially viable, and then find the right partnerships to be able to make them go forward and see if there's a role for you in that process, not necessarily you're going to do it. And then I think we're trying to tell young people who are really excited about the idea of product development and the creation of things that are useful. There may be careers in doing that, but you may not be the discovery person. I think we sometimes get these messages when we say them confusing to people, and it would be really hard to do both. There are rare people who have done both, and they are extraordinary people.
So one of the things I think the sense of, yeah, go ahead, Fred.
Add to that, because I'm really on the outside looking in now. So I made a conscious decision in 1991. I left my grants behind, and I joined Biogen. I maintained my academic affiliation and did some attending and teaching, but you know, I moved on to a different world. But I think part of the answer to your question is it's a lot to ask of a junior faculty member on his or her own to figure out how to do this. And I think to the extent that the Brigham, Harvard, Mass General want to reap the financial benefits, and they should, of product discovery, be it devices or drugs or diagnostics, I think the leadership in those institutions has to say, we are going to foster an environment that will make people feel like there's a career track, an ability to be successful by choosing this path. And that the only path to success at the Brigham or the General can't simply be, you know, how big is your NIH grant and how many papers did you publish last year? Because I think the royalty stream to our institutions, in my view, clearly already demonstrates that that strategy has not grown our endowments. So, you know, there's got to be a view from above as much as there has to be a brave young faculty member who says, I'm willing to do something unconventional, but there also has to be an organizational commitment to enabling those people to be successful and rewarding them.
I'd like to ask Roger to comment on that and what our infrastructure at B-BIC offers to support what Burt's just talking about.
Right, and I think there's a lot of dimensions to that, and B-BIC is relatively new and we're getting off the ground. But I would say that one of the things that's a cornerstone of B-BIC isn't to say, okay, here's some different pot of money to do something that you don't know how to do. But really it is to say, here's a really good idea that's really interesting, and let's identify those, let's get some funding for those, but then let's also bring other resources to bear on those technologies as well. Let's bring industry-trained project managers to help with the process of technology development and developing the opportunity. You know, let's bring the advisory boards that we have around B-BIC, and let's bring the Skills Development Center in to say, let's make the faculty into better partners through that development process. So, you know, I think that it's an experiment and it's early on, but I think that one of the things that B-BIC is an example of is trying to do things differently, because, you know, it's not a period where NIH budgets are doubling, but it's a different world now, and I think that the institutions that I work for need to be reactive to this world that we're in.
So, Burt, I think we're seeing a sense of commitment from the institutions, and the fact that B-BIC exists, I think, is a testimony to the fact that we are very serious about this. But there's one other dimension to Fred's question, which we haven't really gotten to yet. And so, Mark, if you were giving your elevator speech and it was in the academic promotions office at the medical school, we're talking here about a lot of team science. We're not counting individual grants. We're not putting on the scale all your individual efforts, but how you are contributing as a member of a team. How are we going to convince the medical school environment, the academic environment, that there is great value in that, and that actually is worthy of promotion, shall we say? So talk to us about what you would say to the academic officers of our medical schools.
So, it's a great question. So when individuals obviously come up for promotion, it's all about how great that individual is, what they've done, grants, papers, numbers of papers, talks, invited things. If you take time away from that and you do a company, the reality is you would probably publish less. But if you're successful in that venture, and then you can say, I made a difference in patient care, I believe that actually has a huge impact for your career, for your university, and everybody. Now, not everybody believes that. At least at pure academic institutions, it's very rare to have someone who actually tries to think about products and to commercialize it. It's much easier for them to say, okay, you fit into this bucket, you need to have this done, that, and so forth. I think the change has to come from the leadership. I think someone up at the top needs to actually say, look, we value this for the institution, therefore we're going to support that. And you need people who will do the evaluation, who have been successful in this, or appreciate and know its value. And that's changing, and I'm happy to say that there are a number of people that I see getting promoted who have done that, but I think we have to look at the entire picture of that individual, just not that one piece of it. And I think that goes for medical products as well as global health. I think it would be another nice example where maybe you don't have lots of papers, but if you're actually getting a product into an area where they need it, that has value, at least in my mind.
So I agree with all of that. Roger's heard me say this many times. It's like a broken record. I mean, the value chip of product or device is not the publication, it's the patent. And every year I get a letter from Joe Lascause's office asking, and Rich gets the letter, and it's more meaningful for Rich than it is for me, asking for all of your publication. Mm-hmm. Where's the letter that asks for how many patents you've got? Because his patents are fundamentally worth so much more than his myriad of publications.
Right, hold on.
Right.
And where's the plaque in the hallway of the medical school or in the entryway of the Brigham that's got all of the issued patents? I mean, every company that I've been in has got a big wall that has every patent that we've ever gotten. And every time we get a patent, somebody gets a bonus, and we all open bottles of champagne. Because our business is based upon intellectual property. That's how that's why we make money. Mm-hmm. And there should certainly be, at institutions like this, clear recognition for those members of the faculty who have produced patents.
So moving away from the H index.
He needs a rebuttal here, I think. You gotta let him have a rebuttal here.
Yeah, Rich, go ahead.
Well, no, I think the truth is, and you brought it up, that there's a disconnect now between the academic system and translation, and it's hard to advise a young person to go off and do this. I mean, you can do this when you're senior because not only you know more people, but because you can spare the time, and often because you've developed the ideas. But I think that for young people now, to not establish themselves in their career academically puts them potentially in a position where they're at the mercy of hoping that a few people on the promotions committee feel the same way that he does. And the truth is that most promotions committees in the United States don't feel that way. So you have to advise young people, establish yourself first, do this as an obligation second.
Okay, so I see hope on the horizon here, because Burt, we paid careful attention to your slides, and you showed us the graph, and you know the productivity was dropping, plummeting, sales were going up. So an important way to bend that curve is actually to do what you said towards the end there in particular, which is to actually strengthen the notion of the academic industry relationship and recognize that a lot of the products, particularly the biotech products, biologics in particular now, are originating from academic labs. So the hope that I see on the horizon is the fact that centers like B-BIC exist. There's one in Ohio, it's one of the other centers, and there's one in California. I'm also optimistic because every time we sit down and talk about this with Jeff Flyer, he acknowledges the importance of it and has indicated that the medical school is committed to moving beyond putting on the scale what your H-index is and talking more about your contributions as a team scientist. But that's a work in progress. And I'm sure it gives individuals who are thinking about this some degree of pause when they look at the careers. And it's why it's so important to have successful individuals like yourselves actually demonstrating that it is possible to do this. Does this question resonate with anybody in the audience there? Any comments or thoughts about this?
I'd like some letters sent to my promotions committee.
Yeah, sure. We can work on that. Right.
Well, we got to hear your elevator pitch, and then we can write the letters. I would say one more thing. I want to come back to this. I think we need to distinguish a little bit about different career paths within the academia about this issue. So, Rich is a fundamental scientist who's also a physician scientist, sees patients and works in a laboratory. There was a whole generation of those people being produced in relatively large numbers, though never very many in the global standard, in the 80s and 90s. And I think we're in danger of that generation being lost a lot because of the NIH budget. And I think it's one of the greatest things that concerns me about our academic situation today is losing those people. But there are a lot of people that come through clinical training programs who not either have the interest or the skills to be a bench scientist, who are not going to make the fundamental discovery like Rich can in the laboratory, but who are deeply interested in the translational process of his ideas into the clinic. And where I think we haven't done a good job, and where I think there is great growth opportunity, and where I think there is actual promotional opportunity, is for people to recognize that drugs, biologics, small molecules, are actual chemical perturbants that alter human physiology and human function. And if you are a well-trained clinician investigator, and you have a laboratory in which one of Burt's drugs can be put into one of your patients, and you can describe the biology that happens when that occurs in a way that illuminates not only how the drug works, but also how the human body works, you have produced a body of work that is not only important to the healthcare system, but is a seminal contribution to our understanding of human biology, which is the biggest problem that the pharmaceutical industry has. The reason that the failure rate is so high is because human biology is so complex. So for those people that are interested in the intersection of medicines, whether they're devices or drugs, and human biology, there is a career in translational research, which is what I believe translational research should mostly be for academic centers. It's not taking the 1 in 100,000 riches who can make the discovery in their lab and moving into the clinic. God bless everyone who can do that. It's actually looking out to industry with products and knowing how to apply them to what you know about human biology in a clinical setting so that you illuminate not only how the drug works, but how biology works, and that makes the next generation of drugs possible. And so I think that's a really important growth area that we have a great opportunity to expand. And I can't, if the Harvard Medical School can't promote somebody for doing that, there shouldn't be a Harvard Medical School.
Good. I'm glad we have that on tape too. So, Burt, we have a laboratory of systems biology, and systems medicine is a network medicine, or concepts here. Is that something that you think would be important and helpful for people to understand complex human biology that Mason is talking to?
Absolutely, because I think if you get back to the business of drugs and devices, that business is changing in that having the second, third, fourth statin that is incremental, only marginally incrementally better than the second or third, is not going to fly anymore. So the value proposition for pharma is to solve important problems significantly. I think they've pretty well demonstrated that on their own they can't do it. And they don't have access to the right experimental systems. They don't have access to people who think about medical problems vertically in an integrated fashion. So they know there's a problem. They know there's an underlying pathobiology. They know there's a series of cellular or subcellular signaling activities that integrate. So they need access to people who think that way, just as Mason was saying. These integrated strategies that Harvard's been putting together, I think are absolutely essential to moving, for the industry to be able to move from, Me Too drugs to fundamentally novel drugs, right? Humira, the largest selling drug in the world, there's 4 just like it, or 3 just like it, that are not that far down the list. So TNF inhibitors, one is great, one was novel, and 3 more are still profitable. But that model is just not going to continue to exist.
Right.
So we need help solving hard problems, and these are the kinds of places to come.
So systems biology, network medicine is an important concept, and it is gaining a lot of traction in the Longwood campus, Harvard Medical School in particular. In November, we have a course on Introduction to Network Medicine for those who are interested. And I think it's the 3rd time we're offering this course. Still open for enrollment, and those who are interested in pursuing this concept are welcome to look at that. So while we're talking about the kinds of courses we ought to be assembling, there's a question here about whether or not we should have courses on business development as part of our training program. Does that belong here? Does that belong in the business school? Should we build more of an interface with the business school? So, Rich, what's your thought about it?
I think yes, because the fact is most of us don't have the training, and when people start talking about forming a company, evaluations, and how those things are structured, you do have to understand the basics. So for people who are interested in it, I actually think some basic business training is pretty important.
So we have some general courses, and we also have workshops available through the Innovation Lab or the iLab, which is over on the business school campus. It's actually a university resource that's available here. And there are workshops that run through the fall that would be particularly interesting here. Leslie, you've thought about these kinds of things for a while. Just give us your reaction to some of the things we've talked about here in terms of how you would assemble the infrastructure. What are the missing pieces that you see at this point?
Well, the message that's coming through most clearly is the need to work together collaboratively as part of a team, and that you're not going to become an expert in everything, and that wouldn't be necessarily a great use of people's skills, but you do need to know enough to be able to have the conversations and feel comfortable approaching people and to collaborate. And so obviously there's a business component to it, and everybody's so busy. I think being able to access that expertise in a concise manner that's easily accessible on this campus would fill a huge void. I personally think media training is fantastic, but that's probably a personal bent because public speaking isn't my preference. So.
Please.
I completely agree with Rich and suggest it's absolutely necessary, because not only do you have to have the elevator speech correct, but you won't get the elevator speech correct if you don't understand the business model of venture capitalism. So if you're going to go out and try to get money for your idea from venture capitalists and have no idea how they make money and how they allocate money and how they make decisions, as compelling as the science behind those 12 slides may be, you're still likely to walk out of the room without any funding.
Fred, most of the discussion tonight has centered around drugs and biologics, and clearly medical devices are going to be part of this picture as well. You've been very involved in our training programs on medical devices. You want to say a word about that and some of the differences that you have observed about development of devices, development of drugs, for example?
I think that the major differences here that probably ought to be brought out in the discussion is that the business aspects come in even earlier, and that it is often a new company rather than something being picked up by a large pharma or even a small pharma existing company. The company is built around the product, the single product generally, and it's the importance of, as Mark brought in, the convergence of the often engineering and the practitioner. And the idea often originates with a practitioner according to a very specific problem. You might mention the medical device development course.
Tell us when the next one is.
So we do a 2-day medical device development course within the structure of the Harvard Catalyst course program. The next one is October 27, 28, I believe, or 28, 29. The deadline was last week, unfortunately, but we hope to do it every 6 months or so. And hopefully some of what we do that goes through intellectual property development, regulatory issues, career development in the area, and preclinical and clinical development are exactly parallel or convergent with what you all are trying to create. But it's a mini business development course within a technical course, and I think in medical devices this comes together earlier in the development process.
Very important point to emphasize. So, yeah, any other comments or questions? We've got a few more minutes before we can break for our refreshments, or we could go to that earlier if people would like to do that.
I was just going to make one point, kind of echo the comment about knowing your audience and who you're going to be presenting to. You know, if you're pitching a medical device or you're pitching a new drug, two very different stories, and it's important to know, again, what the ask is and what is reasonable to ask. And so, again, knowing the person you're going to be speaking to and knowing what device or what product or what pharmaceutical drug that you're interested in is really critical.
Yeah, if you're pitching to a pharma company, they are a product-based business, so they want to know how to get to the end result of a drug for people. You know, if you're pitching to a venture guys, they're all about how you're going to get to the next value inflection point, which means, you know, what's the next critical question that you have to answer in the process of developing your idea, and why is that going to be a value point for them? Because they're not going to be with you at the end of the day. That's not their business model.
No, it's totally different, actually.
Right.
Last chance, comments, questions? Fred?
There's just one more point that might be worth mentioning in this regard, and it has to do with, I believe, the pitch, is the idea that implicit in Burt's remarks were the billion-dollar cost of developing a drug and the 10 years or more to do so. Medical devices typically are developed with an order of magnitude less cost and probably 2/3 of the time on average. So it's a shorter process. It can be much more focused, and that might influence the ask for the funding to do so.
Okay, so we'll draw this to a close, and I'll point out that we do have a brief reception, and we're going to do exactly what Burt said, which was get out of the lab and start talking to people. This is our opportunity to do that. I'll remind you again that there's rolling admissions for the drive and pilot grants. Please consider submitting your proposals for that. And for those of you who were interested in speaking to some of the principals in B-BIC, the business cards out on the front there are for Leslie and for Cheryl, so please pick those up and make sure you pick up some of the cards that tell you a little bit more about the B-BIC website as well. Thank you very much, and you're all welcome to come to the reception, which is just around the corner. Thanks very much to our panelists and to Burt for his remarks.